The transmission was sent at 0347 hours, Earth Standard Time, on the 14th of March, 2271. It was composed by the United Earth Diplomatic Corps, reviewed by 17 planetary councils, approved by the Secretary-General, and encoded in the 6 most common languages of the interstellar community, a sprawling political body of 41 recognized species spread across 200 light-years of the Orion Arm. The message was simple. It was, in the estimation of the diplomats who wrote it, as clear as language permitted. The Terran sovereignty formally notifies the Keth Dominion that continued incursion into the Aldermain corridor constitutes a violation of the Proxima Accords, signed by Keth representatives in 2241. Should incursions persist, the Terran sovereignty will exercise its right to enforce the terms of that agreement. This constitutes our only warning. We will not issue a second. The message traveled at the speed of light plus the modest relay boost from 4 deep space communication buoys. It reached the Keth Dominion's administrative hub at Vel Sarath within 11 days. The Keth did not respond. This was not an accident. This was not a translation error or a diplomatic delay. The Keth Dominion's High Assembly received the message, had it analyzed by their Strategic Bureau, and made a formal internal decision to classify it as non-actionable noise. The record of that meeting would later be recovered and translated. The session lasted 40 minutes. The discussion of humanity's warning occupied 4 of those minutes. The remaining 36 were spent on a trade dispute involving rare earth mineral rights in a system humans had never visited. The Keth had good reasons to feel secure in their dismissal, and those reasons were not irrational by any historical standard. The Keth Dominion had been a galactic power for 600 years. Their fleet was the 4th largest in the interstellar community. They had fought and won 2 expansion wars in the previous century, had absorbed 3 minor species into client-state relationships, and had successfully resisted a border dispute with the Vorath Collective, a species known for its military aggression, without losing a single core system. Humanity, by contrast, had been a spacefaring civilization for exactly 83 years. 83 years is not a long time by any measure a galactic civilization uses. The Keth still had oral historians who remembered events from 6 centuries ago. Their ships were built on designs refined over generations. Their weapons platforms had been combat tested in real engagements. Their admirals had studied warfare the way humans study the distant past, not as history, but as living profession. What did humanity have to offer against that? From the Keth perspective, very little. Earth had 37 ships capable of interstellar travel. Most of those were merchant vessels or exploratory craft. The Terran sovereignty operated 11 warships, which was generous language for what were essentially armed patrol vessels designed to discourage piracy in contested shipping lanes. Humanity had fought no wars in space. Humanity had no battle-tested doctrine. Humanity had never engaged in a military confrontation beyond their own solar system. The Keth Strategic Bureau produced a 12-page analysis of the Terran sovereignty's military capacity. The final paragraph of that document read as follows: the Terran sovereignty presents no credible deterrent capability within the Aldermain corridor or adjacent regions. Their warning should be understood as a posturing maneuver intended for internal political purposes. No responsive action is recommended. The Bureau was staffed by experienced analysts. Their methodology was sound. Their data was accurate. They had simply never encountered a civilization that spent the first 70 years of its spacefaring history not fighting anyone, not because it couldn't, but because it was learning everything. The Keth continued their incursions into the Aldermain corridor. 7 additional survey vessels crossed the boundary that month. A Keth mineral extraction platform was established on Aldermain 7, a cold, airless rock that humanity had no immediate use for but had formally registered under the Proxima Accords as territorial sovereign space. On Earth, the Diplomatic Corps forwarded the non-response to the Terran Defense Directorate. The Directorate acknowledged receipt and passed it to Admiral Yara Osei Mensa, commander of the Outer Systems Fleet. Admiral Osei Mensa read the intelligence briefing, the strategic assessments, and the complete diplomatic record. Then she read the Keth Strategic Bureau's analysis, which had been acquired through a rather unglamorous combination of signals intelligence and a well-placed source at a neutral trading post near Vel Sarrath. She scheduled a meeting with her senior staff for the following morning. She did not appear concerned, which concerned her staff considerably. Humanity had spent 83 years in space studying everyone else. They had watched empires rise. They had documented wars. They had catalogued weapons systems, propulsion technologies, fleet tactics, and the particular ways that long-established powers tended to underestimate new arrivals. They had done this carefully, systematically, and without once firing a weapon in anger beyond their own system's asteroid belt. There was a phrase that had originated in Earth's military research community sometime around 2190, when the first contact protocols were being drafted and the question of interstellar conflict was still theoretical. The phrase was, quiet accumulation. The idea was straightforward. A new civilization entering a galaxy of established powers has, at most, one chance to be underestimated. That window does not last forever. Eventually, your technology matures or your territory expands and the established powers begin to take you seriously. The only question is what you do with the window while you have it. The Keth Strategic Bureau, in its 12-page analysis of human military capability, had counted human warships. They had measured drive signatures and estimated weapon yields based on energy output. They had been thorough and professional and completely correct about everything they had observed. They had no way of knowing that the ships they observed represented a category of asset that humanity had publicly registered with the interstellar community, as required by treaty. They had no way of knowing about the category that humanity had not publicly registered. No treaty required it. The Proxima Accords contained no provision mandating disclosure of non-deployed assets in development. The interstellar community had no inspection regime for member civilizations' military research programs, because no one had ever thought to build one. Why would they? The established powers had signed the accords when humanity was still decades from its first interstellar flight. Admiral Osei Mensa had, under her operational command, 11 registered patrol vessels. She also had authorization codes for something else entirely. She looked at the intelligence briefing one more time. She looked at the Keth extraction platform coordinates on Aldermane 7. She looked at the trajectory projections for the 7 Keth survey vessels. She opened her personal log and made an entry, which would later become one of the most quoted documents in the historical record of the Aldermane incident. They didn't answer. We told them we wouldn't send a second warning. Begin preparations. Admiral Yara Osei Mensa had not become commander of the Outer Systems Fleet by being impulsive. She had become commander because she had spent 31 years studying every mistake any spacefaring civilization had ever made in the documented record, and she was constitutionally incapable of repeating one. The Outer Systems Fleet was headquartered at Meridian Station, a structure that appeared in interstellar community registries as a logistical support hub for deep space merchant traffic. This was accurate. Meridian Station did support merchant traffic. It was a busy, well-documented facility that hosted refueling operations, cargo transfers, and a small medical bay that had treated crew members from 14 different species. It was also the most heavily defended installation humanity had ever built. The civilian infrastructure was real. The traffic was real. The medical bay had genuinely helped a Vorith cargo pilot with a fractured crest bone 2 months prior. None of that was theater. The defense grid, however, was not something the Keth Strategic Bureau had measured. It was not something anyone had measured, because measuring it would have required sending active sensor probes into a range that would have been recognized as an aggressive act under the Proxima Accords, and no one had ever considered Meridian Station important enough to justify the diplomatic friction. This was the foundational bet that Earth's defense planners had made 40 years earlier, and it had paid off in ways they had not entirely anticipated. When the Terran sovereignty sent its formal notification to the Keth Dominion, the diplomatic message was the honest part. The warning was real. The Terran sovereignty did not issue ultimatums it did not intend to keep, for the same reason a surgeon does not make promises about procedures she has not prepared for. The warning existed because humanity genuinely preferred to resolve the matter without what came next. What came next had a name inside the Directorate. It was called the Quiet Answer. The Quiet Answer was not a weapon in the conventional sense. It was a doctrine, and a set of capabilities built to execute that doctrine, developed over 40 years of careful study of how interstellar conflicts actually unfolded between powers of unequal experience. The core insight was this: a young civilization fighting a superior force directly is almost always destroyed. The historical record across multiple species confirmed it. Direct confrontation between an established military power and a new one favored the established power in 94% of documented cases. The exceptions, the 6%, shared a common feature. They did not fight the way their opponent expected. Humanity had no intention of fighting the way the Keth expected. Dr. Selim Tarhan, the theoretical physicist who had led the drive system research team for the past 12 years, met with Admiral Osei Mensah in a secure conference room 2 levels below Meridian Station's civilian concourse. She brought 3 junior researchers and a data tablet that she handled the way other people handled irreplaceable things. The latest trials, she said, pulling up a sequence of test data, confirmed operational range of 4.2 light-years on a single charge cycle. Positioning accuracy is within 600 meters. That's after we corrected the harmonic issue from the February tests. 600 meters, the Admiral said. At 4 light-years. Yes. The Admiral looked at the data for a moment. And signatures? Undetectable by any sensor array in the interstellar community's published specifications database. We tested against reconstructed versions of Keth, Vorith, and collective sensor grids. Nothing. Osei Mensah set the tablet down. How many units are ready? 23 at full operational capacity. 9 more in final systems checks. We expect those cleared within 72 hours. The Admiral did the arithmetic she had already done many times. 32 units. The Keth had 7 survey vessels in the corridor and a mineral extraction platform that was, according to her intelligence officer, supported by a rotational security detail of 2 patrol cruisers. What's the Keth's closest fleet concentration? Her intelligence officer, Commander Driss Aboud, answered without checking his notes. Vel Sarath, 17 light-years from the corridor boundary. Their second rapid response fleet. 43 vessels, including 8 capital ships. Transit time to the corridor at standard drive speeds is approximately 9 days. Standard drive speeds, the Admiral said. Yes, sir. She did not say anything else about that for a moment. She looked at the star chart on the conference room wall, a 3-dimensional projection of the Aldermain corridor and the surrounding systems. I want tactical proposals on my desk by 0600 tomorrow. Full options, from minimum intervention to maximum response. I want casualty projections, timeline projections, and an assessment of the Keth's likely escalation response at each level. Understood, Aboud said. And I want complete communication silence maintained on anything related to this operation. Nothing on any registered frequency. Nothing that goes through a community relay. Personal courier only for hard copy transfers. The room nodded. One more thing, the Admiral said, turning from the star chart. I want the diplomatic record reviewed one more time for any opening they might have left us. Any ambiguity in their non-response that could constitute good faith engagement. Her diplomatic liaison, a quiet man named Yusuf Brennan Ghazi, looked at her steadily. I've reviewed it 4 times, Admiral. There is no ambiguity. They received the message, they discussed it, and they made a considered decision to proceed with the incursions anyway. I know, she said. I want it reviewed again anyway. This was the part that the Keth strategic analysts had missed when they characterized humanity as a minor power engaging in posturing. Humanity's caution was genuine. The preference for a resolved, nonviolent outcome was not diplomatic performance. It was the actual preference of the people who would be implementing the alternative. But the Terran sovereignty had also learned something from 83 years of watching the interstellar community operate. Good intentions without demonstrated capability are simply requests. And requests, in a galaxy organized around power, are not answered. The meeting ended. Admiral Osei Mensa returned to her office and sat alone for 17 minutes before beginning the authorization sequence for the operation. She was thorough. She was deliberate. She had read everything. She was also, in the deepest part of herself, aware that what she was about to set in motion would permanently change what other civilizations believed humanity to be. That was the point. The all-domain corridor was not a particularly remarkable stretch of space. It was a navigational region approximately 40 light-years long and 8 light-years wide, defined by a natural gravitational gradient that made transit through it roughly 30% faster than the alternative routes connecting the inner community systems to the mineral-rich outer fringe. Every significant civilization that operated in this part of the Orion Arm used it. That was why the Proxima Accords had been so specific about territorial sovereignty within it. Without agreed boundaries, the corridor would have been fought over continuously, and the transit lanes that everyone depended on would have been perpetually disrupted. The Keth had signed those accords. They had simply come to believe, over the intervening 30 years, that the accords were enforced by reputation and political pressure rather than by any actual capacity to compel compliance. In that belief, they were historically accurate. The interstellar community had no enforcement fleet. The accords had been violated before by other parties, and the resolution had always been diplomatic, lengthy negotiations, compensatory arrangements, face-saving language on all sides. They expected the same process now. What they did not expect was silence. The silence began at 0200 hours on April 3, 2271. The first indication that something unusual was occurring came from the crew of the Keth survey vessel Instrument of Prosperous Return, which was conducting mineral assessment operations near Aldermain 11. The crew of 9 had been working standard shifts for 3 weeks without incident. Their communication to Vel Sarrath, sent at 0212, was routine: system status, mineral data update, crew health report. It was the last communication the Instrument of Prosperous Return ever sent. At 0214, the vessel vanished from every sensor array within detection range. It did not explode. There was no debris field consistent with weapons discharge. There was no distress beacon. The navigational beacon that the survey vessel was required to broadcast under community traffic regulations simply stopped broadcasting, as though the ship had ceased to exist in the middle of the sentence it was transmitting. The Keth patrol cruiser Steadfast in Purpose, part of the security rotation supporting the extraction platform on Aldermain 7, detected the beacon loss at 0219. Standard procedure required them to attempt contact and report the anomaly to their command. They attempted contact on 4 frequencies. They received no response. They sent a report to the extraction platform and to the nearest Keth relay buoy at 0224. That report never arrived. The relay buoy had stopped functioning at 0221. The extraction platform on Aldermain 7 operated for another 6 hours without knowing that either of these events had occurred, because the communication relay architecture in the Aldermain corridor was built on the assumption that the relay buoys would remain operational. When they didn't, the platform's crew had no way of knowing, because the absence of communication is indistinguishable from routine communication delay without a reference clock comparison that the platform's systems were not configured to perform. At 0847, the platform's shift supervisor ran a standard system diagnostic and noticed that the expected confirmation signal from relay buoy 7 had not been logged in 11 hours. This was unusual but not unheard of. Relay buoys experienced technical faults. She logged it and flagged it for the platform's communication technician. The communication technician began troubleshooting at 0912. He attempted contact with the relay buoy directly, then with the 2 survey vessels currently operating in the corridor section, then with the patrol cruiser rotation. He received responses from none of them. He notified the platform commander at 0931. The platform commander, a senior logistics officer named Coordinator Thes Sanvarik, spent approximately 40 minutes trying to determine whether this was a widespread technical failure or something else. At 1015, he made the decision to dispatch one of the platform's two auxiliary shuttles to physically reach the nearest relay buoy and assess its condition. The shuttle departed at 1024. It reached the coordinates of relay buoy 7 at 1051. The buoy was not there. Not damaged. Not drifting. Not dark. The buoy was simply absent from the location where it had been operating continuously for 3 years. The shuttle pilot circled the coordinates twice, ran active sensors at maximum range, and confirmed to the platform that there was no trace of the buoy or any debris associated with it. Coordinator Varick sent a maximum priority alert to Vel Sarrath at 1104, transmitting on the platform's own antenna system, which was more powerful than the relay buoys but still dependent on other relay infrastructure further along the chain. That alert was received at Vel Sarrath 14 hours later, because 2 additional relay points in the chain had also become unavailable. By the time the alert arrived, Coordinator Varick had also lost contact with the second patrol cruiser in the security rotation. The platform had no way of knowing that by then, there was no one left in the Aldermain corridor to contact. The Keth's second rapid response fleet at Vel Sarrath received the fragmented, partially corrupted alert at 23:18 on April 3. Fleet Admiral Das Seth Corvain was woken from sleep to read it. He read it twice, then called his senior staff. The initial assessment was communications infrastructure failure. The corridor's relay network was aging. Budget disputes had delayed maintenance for 2 years. It was not impossible that multiple points had failed simultaneously, though it was unlikely. The secondary assessment, suggested by his intelligence officer, was a signal disruption event, some kind of interference phenomenon, naturally occurring or otherwise. The tertiary assessment, which no one said out loud in that first meeting but which was in the room anyway, was that something had removed those assets deliberately and efficiently and without generating any detectable weapon signature at all. Admiral Corvain ordered a reconnaissance probe launched toward the corridor at 0045 on April 4. The probe was a small, fast, autonomous unit designed to travel ahead of fleet assets and report back. It reported back once, 9 hours into its transit, confirming its position and drive status. It did not report back again. At Vel Sarrath, Fleet Admiral Corvain sat in his command center and looked at a star chart that had, until 3 days ago, contained 7 survey vessels, 2 patrol cruisers, an extraction platform, and a relay network. The chart was empty. He sent an emergency communication to the Keth High Assembly. He also, quietly, sent a separate communication on a channel he had not used in 2 years, a channel that connected to a small office in the diplomatic quarter of Vel Sarrath where a Terran trade representative named Councillor Imani Ferreira Okafor maintained an office. The message was 4 words. What have you done? Councillor Imani Ferreira Okafor had been the Terran Sovereignty's trade representative at Vel Sarrath for 6 years. She was 44 years old, had a background in economic diplomacy, and was the kind of person who became fluent in Keth commercial notation as a hobby. She was also, technically, the most senior Terran official within 60 light-years of Vel Sarrath. She read Fleet Admiral Corvain's message at 0312 local time, sitting at her desk in an office that smelled of the herbal tea she had been drinking when the notification arrived. She considered the message for a long time. Then she drafted a response. The response was also brief. The Terran Sovereignty issued one warning. That warning was received, considered, and disregarded. The terms of the Proxima Accords have been enforced. We are prepared to discuss terms for normalization. She transmitted it and went back to her tea. The response arrived on Corvain's screen at 0324. He read it standing up, which was unusual for him. He forwarded it immediately to the High Assembly, flagged as maximum priority. The High Assembly convened an emergency session at 0600. The session lasted 6 hours. The central problem was not military. The central problem was informational. The Keth did not know what had happened in the Aldermain corridor, and not knowing meant they could not effectively respond. Were their vessels destroyed? Captured? Relocated? Their sensor network in the corridor was gone, which meant they had no independent means of assessment. Every probe they sent went silent. They had dispatched 4 additional reconnaissance units during the night, and not one had reported back after the initial position confirmation. Whatever had cleared the Aldermain corridor had not stopped operating. This was, for the High Assembly, deeply unsettling information. Military campaigns have a rhythm. An adversary deploys force, you observe the deployment, you assess the capability, you formulate a response. That rhythm depends on observation. If you cannot observe, you cannot assess. If you cannot assess, every decision you make is a guess. The Terran sovereignty had, in a single night of activity, denied the Keth High Assembly the ability to make an informed decision. This was not an accident. This was the doctrine. General Pauline Nakamura Reed, who had written large sections of the Quiet Answer strategic framework 12 years earlier, had a phrase she used with junior officers when explaining the philosophy: we are not trying to defeat the Keth fleet. We are trying to defeat the Keth decision. Defeating a fleet requires destroying ships. That is expensive, slow, and produces a great deal of information for your adversary: debris, energy signatures, survivor accounts. It tells them what you have and how you use it. Defeating a decision requires only that you make the information environment so uncomfortable that the rational choice becomes the one you want your adversary to make. You do not need them to be unable to fight. You need them to be unsure whether fighting is a calculation that resolves in their favor. The Keth High Assembly, in its emergency session on April 4, was doing exactly the calculation that General Nakamura Reed had designed the doctrine to produce. The known facts were these: 9 assets in the Aldermain corridor, 7 survey vessels, 2 patrol cruisers, 1 extraction platform, and the relay network supporting all of them, had been removed from operation without generating any detectable signature of conventional weapons use. 5 reconnaissance probes sent into the corridor had also gone silent. The Terran sovereignty had responded to a direct message acknowledging responsibility and offering normalization discussions. The unknown facts were: how this had been accomplished, whether the capability was limited to the corridor or could operate elsewhere, how many units humanity was deploying, and what specifically happened to the removed assets. Keth High Counselor Permanent Veth, who chaired the Assembly's Security Committee, posed the question that was hovering over every conversation: can we retrieve the second rapid response fleet from Vel Sarrath to the corridor boundary and demonstrate that the cost of this action is too high for the humans to sustain? The fleet's senior tactical advisor, a 3-decade veteran named Strategy Master Olivan Drethos, answered carefully. If we knew what we were facing, I would say yes, with moderate confidence. The Second Fleet has more than sufficient conventional firepower to secure the corridor against any human force we have documented. He paused. We do not know what we are facing. We do not know whether the force that cleared the corridor can operate against a fleet concentration of 43 vessels at Vel Sarrath, or in transit, or only in the corridor itself. We do not know whether deploying the Second Fleet makes it a target. The chamber was quiet. What we do know, Drethos continued, is that the humans sent a warning, and they said it would be the only one. They appear to have meant that. They have not, as of this session, struck any Keth asset outside the Aldermain corridor. They have not issued any threats of escalation. They have offered normalization discussions. High Counselor Veth tapped the table. You are suggesting we talk. I am suggesting that talking costs us nothing while we gather information, and that deploying the Second Fleet into an environment we cannot observe costs us the Second Fleet if we have misjudged our adversary's capability. This was the practical logic of a careful military mind encountering a situation his training had not fully prepared him for. It was also, in retrospect, the first correct assessment the Keth leadership had made about humanity since the warning arrived. The High Assembly voted to authorize diplomatic contact with Councillor Ferreira Okafor's office and to request a direct channel to Terran sovereignty leadership. Councillor Ferreira Okafor, when she received notification of the request, sent a single message back to Earth before responding to the Keth. The message read, Phase 1 is complete. They want to talk. How would you like to proceed? Admiral Ose Mensah's response arrived 6 hours later, after the light speed delay. It said, "Let them ask their questions. Answer only what we are prepared to confirm. And be kind. They've had a difficult week." The first direct conversation between Counselor Ferreira Okafor and High Counselor Veth took place via secure channel on April 6, 2271. It lasted 3 hours. A partial transcript of that exchange became publicly available 11 years later when the diplomatic archives were declassified, and historians have studied it extensively since. The exchange is notable for what the Terran representative chose to disclose, and for what she did not. Veth's first substantive question was the one everyone expected: what happened to the Keth vessels in the Aldermain corridor? Ferreira Okafor's answer was both honest and carefully constructed. The vessels are intact. Their crews are unharmed. They have been relocated outside the boundaries of Terran sovereign space as defined under the Proxima Accords. Coordinates for retrieval will be provided as part of any normalization agreement. Veth's follow-up was equally expected: how? Ferreira Okafor said, "The specific technical means are not something we are prepared to disclose. What I can tell you is that the Terran sovereignty has developed capabilities that the Accords did not require us to register, because no disclosure provision existed. We did not conceal them in violation of any treaty. We simply did not advertise them." "That seems like a significant omission," Veth said. "No more significant than the omission of informing us that you had decided to disregard our warning," Ferreira Okafor replied, without any particular sharpness. Veth was quiet for a moment. "Can you deploy this capability against Vel Sarath?" "I am not going to answer that question," Ferreira Okafor said. "Not because the answer is no, and not to create an impression that it isn't. I am not going to answer it because the purpose of this conversation is normalization, not capability disclosure, and providing that information would serve neither of us in the direction we are both trying to travel." This was, as subsequent analysts noted, an extremely sophisticated diplomatic answer. It confirmed nothing. It denied nothing. It communicated, clearly and without aggression, that the question was off the table without explaining why. It left Veth in exactly the position that General Nakamura Reed's doctrine intended: uncertain, and aware of his uncertainty. Veth moved to the question of what the Terran sovereignty wanted. Ferreira Okafor had prepared for this. She had, in fact, prepared for it for 6 years, because her assignment at Vel Sarath had never been purely commercial. She was there because someone in the Directorate had understood, a long time ago, that the moment after a demonstration was the most important moment, and that the person who handled it needed to know exactly what they were trying to build. "We want 3 things," she said. First, a formal Keth acknowledgement that the Aldermain corridor boundaries established under the Proxima Accords are valid and binding. In writing, registered with the community. Second, the removal of the extraction platform infrastructure from Aldermain 7 within 90 days. Third, a standing consultation mechanism between our governments for future disputes in the corridor, so that neither of us ever has to have this particular conversation again. Veth looked at her across the channel for a long moment. "That's it? That's it? No reparations? No territorial concession beyond what the Accords already specified?" "We don't want your territory, High Counselor. We want the territory the Accords already assigned to us left alone." There was another long pause. "You are not making a larger claim on the basis of this demonstration?" "No." "Why not?" This was the question Ferreira Okafor had thought about the most. She answered it honestly, because she believed the honest answer was also the strategically correct one. "Because we are not trying to take things from you. We are trying to establish that we are the kind of civilization that means what it says. That is worth more to us, long-term, than any territorial or material gain we could extract from this situation. We want every species in the interstellar community to know that when the Terran sovereignty issues a warning, the warning is real. That reputation is valuable. We have no interest in poisoning it by being greedy." The 3-hour conversation ended with Veth requesting 48 hours to consult with the High Assembly. Ferreira Okafor said that was acceptable. She sat alone in her office after the channel closed and drank the rest of her tea, which had gone cold. Across the community, the story was spreading. It moved the way all significant news moves in a network of civilizations, quickly among those who were paying attention, slowly among those who weren't, and with a great deal of distortion in both directions. Some species received reports suggesting humanity had destroyed the Keth vessels. Others received accounts suggesting the Keth had surrendered under military threat. A few received breathless intelligence summaries suggesting humans had developed a weapon that erased ships from existence. None of these were accurate. The Terran sovereignty issued a single public statement, drafted carefully and released simultaneously to every community member with whom they had diplomatic relations. The Terran sovereignty has enforced the terms of the Proxima Accords in the Aldermain Corridor. All affected vessels and personnel are unharmed. Normalization discussions are ongoing. We have no further statement at this time. It was the most understated announcement of a paradigm shift in the interstellar community's recent history. Several community members requested detailed briefings. The Terran sovereignty politely declined all of them. The Vorath Collective, whose relationship with humanity had been courteous but distant, convened an internal strategy session that was not disclosed publicly but which lasted 2 days and reportedly concluded with a resolution to review every assessment the collective had made about Terran capabilities in the past 20 years. The Keth High Assembly, 48 hours after Ferreira Okafor's conversation with Veth, returned its answer. They accepted all 3 conditions. There is a concept in xenopolitical theory, developed by the interstellar community's own academic institutions, called sudden credibility transition. It describes the moment when a minor power becomes a major one, not through a gradual accumulation of influence, but through a single event that forces a comprehensive reassessment across all parties simultaneously. The Aldermain incident was the most studied example of sudden credibility transition in community history for the next 100 years. The immediate effects were visible within weeks. The queue at Earth's diplomatic receiving offices, historically modest, grew to include formal meeting requests from 31 of the community's 41 recognized species. Several of those requests were from parties who had never previously sought bilateral relations with the Terran sovereignty at all. Admiral Osei Mensa, who was not a politician and did not particularly enjoy being one, gave a single interview to the Terran Public Information Service 2 weeks after the normalization agreement was signed. It was broadcast on Earth and on every Terran settlement vessel and outpost in the outer systems. The interviewer, a journalist named Clara Oduya, asked the question that everyone was asking. Admiral, the interstellar community has been a functioning political body for over 300 years. Most of the member species have been spacefaring for centuries. Humanity has been in space for 83 years. How did we do this? Osei Mensa took a moment before answering, which was characteristic of her. We watched, she said. We watched everyone. We read everything. We studied every war, every diplomatic failure, every technological development. We asked what the patterns were. We asked why some civilizations failed when they shouldn't have and why others survived when the odds seemed against them. We spent 83 years gathering information and building things, and we didn't rush any of it. And the technology? Oduya asked. The capability you used in the corridor, can you tell us anything about it? No, the Admiral said simply. Will you eventually? When it no longer matters because we've built something better? Possibly. Oduya smiled. Some observers are calling this a demonstration of force. Others are calling it a diplomatic masterstroke. How do you characterize it? Osei Mensa considered the question. I characterize it as keeping our word. We said we would issue one warning. We issued one warning. The Keth made a decision. We responded. The Keth reconsidered. We normalized. Nobody was hurt. The accords are being respected. That's the outcome we wanted. And if they hadn't reconsidered? She met the camera without expression. Then we would have continued doing what we were doing until they did. The interview was translated into 41 languages and circulated throughout the community within 6 weeks. Different parties emphasized different portions. The Vorith Collective highlighted the phrase, "continued doing what we were doing." The Synthari Union, a collection of smaller species that had historically found themselves in client relationships with larger powers, highlighted, "nobody was hurt." The Keth Public Information Service, dealing with an electorate that was trying to understand what had happened to their survey fleet, emphasized, "the accords are being respected," and provided as little additional context as possible. For General Nakamura Reed, who was retired by this point and living on a research station orbiting Jupiter, the most significant response was one that received almost no attention in the public record. 11 days after the normalization agreement was signed, she received a personal message from Strategy Master Olivan Drethos of the Keth 2nd Rapid Response Fleet. They had met once, years earlier, at a community symposium on navigation rights. The message was brief and had no official character whatsoever. Strategy Master Drethos to General Nakamura Reed. I reviewed the situation carefully. I advised my government correctly. I want you to know that I understand the discipline that produced this outcome. I have recommended to the High Assembly that we commission a full study of your doctrine. I do not think we will ever wish to be in this situation again. Nakamura Reed read the message, flagged it for her personal archive, and did not respond for 3 days. When she did, she wrote, "That is the correct lesson, Strategy Master. The study will not help you as much as you hope. The doctrine is only effective when it is built over decades and never revealed until necessary. Knowing it exists changes the calculus for everyone. Which, in the end, is the point." She sent that message and then went for a walk along the observation corridor that circled the station's equator, where the view of Jupiter's cloud band stretched across the viewport in bands of amber and cream. She had spent 20 years designing a system intended never to be used. The profound irony was that using it once, carefully and restrainedly, probably made future use less necessary. Probably. This was the uncertainty that lived in the space between theory and practice. A doctrine designed to make conflict irrational for your adversary depends entirely on your adversary behaving rationally. The Keth had behaved rationally, eventually. Not every species in the community would. She made a note to discuss this with Osei Mensa at their next scheduled review. Meanwhile, on Aldermane 7, a Keth removal crew was carefully dismantling an extraction platform that had operated for exactly 31 days. The crew chief, a pragmatic woman named Foreman Resch, had received minimal briefing on why the platform was being removed. She knew only that the contracts had been terminated and the equipment needed to come out. She worked efficiently and without complaint and wondered, occasionally, where the 3-week crew rotation she had been scheduled to relieve had gone. Nobody told her. She didn't ask the right people. It was not her problem to solve. The crew completed dismantling and departed Aldermane 7 on May 14, 2271. The system was quiet again. The same cold light from Aldermane's distant sun fell on the same airless rock, and the rock was indifferent to all of it. The Proxima Accords held. 3 years after the Aldermane incident, the interstellar community added a provision to the Proxima Accords that had not existed before. It was called Article 44, and it was 12 paragraphs long. The core substance of it was simple: all member civilizations were required to register non-deployed military assets that met certain technical thresholds, defined by a joint technical committee. The registration would be maintained in a sealed database accessible only to community mediators in the event of a formal dispute. The provision had been proposed by the Vorith Collective, seconded by 7 other species, and debated for 14 months. The Terran sovereignty voted in favor of it. This surprised several parties who had expected humanity to oppose mandatory disclosure, given that the entire strategic value of the Aldermane operation had derived from concealed capability. Councillor Ferreira Okafor, now serving as Deputy Secretary for Community Affairs, explained the Terran position in the ratification debate. The Terran sovereignty supports Article 44 because the goal was never to hide what we have. The goal was to have it when we needed it. We have now demonstrated that we have it and that we use it with restraint and proportionality. Disclosure going forward costs us nothing and potentially prevents the kind of miscalculation that made the all-domain situation necessary in the first place. We are not interested in being a mystery. We are interested in being clearly understood. The ratification passed with 38 votes in favor, 2 abstentions, and 1 absence. Admiral José Mensah was promoted to Chief of the Terran Defense Directorate 6 months after the normalization agreement. Her first act in that role was to commission a review of all active strategic doctrines in light of the changed information environment. If other civilizations now knew that quiet accumulation was a viable strategy, they might attempt it themselves. The Directorate needed to think carefully about what a 30 or 40-year horizon looked like for a species that decided, tomorrow, to emulate what humanity had done. The review produced a document called the Long Watch Assessment, which remained classified for decades. The public version of the assessment, released in summary, contained one paragraph that José Mensah had insisted on including despite the preference of several committee members to leave it out. The all-domain incident demonstrated that a young civilization can develop significant capability while remaining below the threshold of detection for established powers focused on conventional metrics. This is not a replicable strategy in the same form by any civilization that has now observed it. However, it points to a broader principle that has implications for community-wide security: observed capability is always incomplete capability. Assessments based solely on registered and documented assets systematically underestimate any party that has chosen to invest in less observable means. The community should assume that multiple parties are, at any given time, in possession of capabilities that no current intelligence assessment accounts for. The paragraph was discussed in academic circles and defense institutions across the community for years. For the Keth specifically, the all-domain incident produced political consequences that lasted longer than anyone in the Terran sovereignty had anticipated. High Counselor Permanent Veth resigned from the High Assembly 8 months after the normalization agreement, citing health reasons. The Keth Strategic Bureau's 12-page analysis of Terran military capability was leaked to the Keth press 2 years later, causing a significant political controversy. The Bureau's director was replaced. The analytical methodology was reviewed. The replacement director, a careful and thorough officer named Bureau Chief Tessina Vorik, sent a formal inquiry to the Terran Sovereignty's diplomatic office asking whether any educational exchange on strategic assessment methodology might be possible. The Terran Sovereignty responded that it was happy to discuss professional exchanges in general terms, and that specific proposals could be submitted through the standard community exchange program. Bureau Chief Vorik submitted a proposal. It was approved. 12 Keth analytical officers spent 8 months at a Terran Research Institute in Nairobi 2 years later. They returned home with better methodology and an enduring respect for what rigor, patience, and long-term planning could produce. None of them learned anything about the specific technology used in the corridor. They hadn't expected to. For humanity itself, the 3 years after Aldermain were a period of significant adjustment. The Terran sovereignty had spent 83 years existing at the margins of community awareness, present, registered, attending meetings, never causing trouble. That era ended on April 3, 2271, and did not return. The experience of being attended to carefully was new. It was not uniformly comfortable. Some of the diplomatic attention was friendly. Some was probing. Some was the particular kind of attention that sophisticated actors give to a new variable that has entered an equation they thought they understood. Dr. Selan Tarhan, whose team had built the core technology that made the corridor operation possible, left the Defense Directorate's Research Division and returned to academic research 2 years after Aldermain. She published 4 papers in community-accessible journals in the following decade, none of which described anything that had been used operationally. She was cited frequently. Several community species tried to work out, from her published work, what the gap was. They did not find it. She won a Community Science Prize 11 years after Aldermain. At the ceremony, she gave a speech that was brief and entirely about the philosophy of patient inquiry rather than any specific discovery. She said, "The most important tool a scientist has is not intelligence or equipment. It is the willingness to wait. To observe without interrupting. To accumulate understanding before drawing conclusions. We apply this to nature as a matter of professional discipline. We should apply it to our neighbors for the same reason. In the audience, representatives of 6 different species sat in their respective sections of the hall and listened. Several of them were wondering what she knew that she wasn't saying. The answer, of course, was quite a lot. Humanity had not stopped watching. Humanity had not stopped building. The events of April 3, 2271, had resolved one situation in one corridor. The Terran sovereignty operated in a community of 41 species, at least a dozen of whom were paying considerably more attention now than they had been before. Admiral Osei Mensa, sitting at her desk in the Defense Directorate 3 years after the corridor went quiet, was reading the Long Watch Assessment's classified annexes for the 4th time. She had a habit of returning to foundational documents when new information arrived, to see whether her earlier conclusions held. They held. The universe had not become simpler because humanity had demonstrated something. It had become more complex in ways that were manageable but required constant attention. The warning they had issued to the Keth had been real. The capability they had deployed had been real. The restraint they had exercised in using it minimally and proportionally had been as deliberate as any other element of the operation. But the next situation would not be the same as this one. It never was. She made a note on her review document and closed it. Then she opened the morning intelligence summary and began reading about a new development in a sector 300 light-years from Aldermain, where a species called the Rethon had begun a series of actions that the summary characterized as potentially inconsistent with their community obligations. She read that phrase twice. Potentially inconsistent. She thought about the message she had sent 3 years ago, on the morning that the operation began. They didn't answer. We told them we wouldn't send a second warning. She pulled up a new document and began drafting a brief for her diplomatic office. She did not draft a warning. Not yet. There were steps before a warning. There was watching, and learning, and careful assessment. Humanity had spent 83 years learning how to do those things well. They had not stopped.